Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I want the truth!
Why don't you answer him?
Hey, welcome to another episode of Objection, Your Fiction. Today, we are going to be talking about one of my favorite shows of all time, but certainly probably my favorite show of the last year, The Bear. And we're really lucky to be joined by Jasmine Moy. Jasmine is a lawyer in the hospitality and restaurant industry. She knows the business firsthand from her own years working front of house. That's in my script. I guess it's a restaurant term, right? Front of house.
Yeah, it's the host and the manager and all the people serving people you see. Yeah.
Okay. And also represents some of the most celebrated chefs and restaurateurs working today, and has counseled everyone from first-time entrepreneurs to global hotel brands. Recently wrote a piece for Food and Wine where she breaks down the legal aspects of The Bear, what it gets right, what it gets wrong, et cetera, et cetera. Jasmine, super excited to have you here to talk about The Bear.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me.
So I guess I want to start by, let's go back to season 1 of The Bear. And for those who don't know, usually we do like we're talking about the show holistically. Sometimes we talk about an episode and I give like a recap. The Bear is a show about a family run sandwich shop. And part of the family is this chef who is a celebrated chef across the country. He works at, now I'm forgetting, French Laundry. He works in French Laundry in California and other celebrated restaurants, and he's a great chef. And he comes back home to kind of ultimately transition this really great sandwich shop into a Michelin star rated restaurant. I think that's a fair overview of the show, right?
Yeah, fair.
So when you're sitting down to watch season 1, Jasmine, as someone who has background in the restaurant industry and is also now a hospitality lawyer, what are some of the first things that are going through your head as you're watching the first couple of episodes?
Yeah, so my one disclaimer is I'm a transactional business attorney, so all of my work is really sort of contractual and corporate. There probably are a lot of other legal issues with other things going on, and in fact, when I was emailing with the woman who assists you in, I think, researching and setting up these scheduling podcasts, she mentioned a bunch of other illegal things that I was like, wait, I don't remember those happening. Mostly because I was like, oh, this is silly drama, whatever
Yeah.
business. But the funny thing is so many of my clients who are chefs are like, I don't watch the show. I can't watch a show. It's too stressful. It reminds me too much of being at work. Like, I don't want to go home and sit on my couch and then be stressed out about, being in the weeds in the kitchen, about staff calling out, about equipment breaking, or any of the things that are part of their day-to-day lives that you see in the show. They're like, I don't need to be bringing that into my existence in my spare time when I'm like trying to relax and like decompress. So I
Definitely not a relaxing show, even for the non-restaurateur. It's a very, very stressful.
Yeah, it's not. So, but I have to say, like, most of my clients do not watch it because they just physically, they're like, it's uncomfortable. It's not enjoyable. So it was so funny to hearing how much they were like, oh, it's so bothersome. And, in the article I mentioned that I did work in restaurants, but I was like, I was a server. I waited tables for a really long time, and they do some front of house stuff. You do see some sort of pre-shift meetings and things like that. But I wasn't like really bothered by sort of the unreal, the too realistic parts of the show, or even the unrealistic parts of the show. But then they sort of then started getting into like corporate structural
Yeah.
parts of actually owning a restaurant. I was like, oh, so now this is my bread and butter. And so now I'm starting to have issues with like the way that they're portraying this, the way that the business is being structured, the way that they've got sort of two separate lines of business seemingly operating under one umbrella, which is such a no-no. And I just, it was complaining to a friend of mine who is an editor at Food and Wine magazine. And I was like, the Bear is really falling apart. Like, oh, they're doing this and this and that. And Cisco, who's the investor, why does he have so much control? And Kat, my friend, said, I'm going to stop you right there because I think this is an article. Stop complaining to me and start writing it down. So that's sort of how the article came into existence. If I just was watching it and feeling like this isn't right. This is not how restaurants are structured. This is not how people put together restaurants. This is not how you invest in a restaurant. None of this is how this works. But, most people wouldn't really know that. And so I don't know that anybody would notice some of these inconsistencies, because why would they? Why would they understand how a restaurant investment works? Most people do not invest in restaurants, for a host of reasons. Chief among them is, they're risky investments. So you really have to have money that you're prepared to never see again, if you're going to put them into a restaurant. But they are structured in sort of a unique way, at least as it relates to startup investments or things like that. It did get sort of specific, and it's specifically my realm, which is why I got a little heated about it, I think.
I could tell.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we explore in this podcast is there is this tension between making a show entertaining and being, realistic. Like, think about all the courtroom drama. I'm more of a trial attorney. I have not seen probably one single courtroom scene that's true to form, because unfortunately, for the most part, like a trial is kind of boring. It's incrementally building a case or disproving a case. You're not going to have like that Jack Nicholson, I want the truth, Tom Cruise moment. Never happens. So I think that's always the case, right? Like balancing those two things. But it sounds like here there's some like real bad missteps in terms of how restaurant structure is portrayed, that maybe they didn't have the right person consulting, or they just didn't feel like it was a way to do it in an interesting enough way. What to your mind was like the most glaring inaccuracy? I know your article lists a bunch, but if you had to pick one, what do you think it is, and kind of talk everybody through, why it's so inaccurate?
Yeah, the idea that, and again, this provides the linchpin to really the tension that this most recent season was putting in front of you. There was no tension without that clock sitting on the counter, counting down the minutes to when, their Uncle Jimmy, their main investor, was going to pull the plug on this business. And
for the people listening who like The Bear but haven't watched season 4, we are going to spoil some stuff.
Yeah,
so,
spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the last season, it sort of was suggested a little bit that their main investor was running out of money, and essentially, if the restaurant can't start making real money within, somewhat very unrealistic number, I think it was like 3 months of opening, or 3 or 4 months of opening, that he was going to shut them down. So it would be just, it would be so stupid to take the kind of money you need to take from someone to spend the many, many months it takes to build, renovate, outfit a restaurant, and then to only have 3 months of leeway in order to make a profit. And so it's both, the timeline was very unrealistic, but that I know that that's what was providing the tension that was moving that season along. But also the idea that an investor would ever have that kind of control. It would be, and I'm not saying that has never happened. Probably there have been people in hospitality who maybe didn't have a lawyer, or who maybe didn't talk to other people in the industry about how this typically works. But generally speaking, the people who are operating the restaurant, the chef or the general manager, or whatever combination of people who are operating, who hopefully, and most of the time, if you're going to operate something successfully, have had experience doing the thing that they're doing, which is running the restaurant. Generally speaking, those people will have, control over, number one, there's no timeline on which they are ever having to pay back anybody. They'll generally say, we would like to pay you back within 3 to 4 years. That's like a reasonable timeline. There's no guarantee of profitability on any timeline. And in fact, depending on what time of the year you open, it can be much more difficult to make a profit. Restaurants are sort of notoriously slow in the summer in many cities, because people travel and go out of town and things like that. And also it takes several months to figure out what you need in the restaurant in terms of people and product and things like that. So there's a lot of mixed costs and expenses that are unpredictable that you're trying to manage and predict. And then you're updating your business plans and your performance as you go by. So anyways, all of that, takes 3 to 6 months to even sort of figure out where your baseline is. So having that limited window is entirely unrealistic. But then the fact that the investor can just take everything away at sort of the snap of a finger, that is also not a thing that anyone should agree to, and that I've never seen anyone even contemplate or even see an investor for. So I think it's the general terms and arrangement of this setup, but it's a few different prongs of things coming together in ways that, like, none of these things should be happening, but why are they all four happening at the same
for good TV. But
time? Yeah.
I guess one thing comes to mind.
It could have been something else. It could have been like they got a loan from a bank, or they got a loan from a bank that it is under securitized or something. There were, I think, a lot of other ways for them to have done that, and maybe a more realistic scenario. I was like, there are a lot of ways to have put the restaurant on a timeline or on a string that aren't that.
Yeah.
The property could have had a mortgage or things like that, or I don't know what. So it's there were options.
But what I was thinking when you were just talking, are there situations where like the investor is like a celebrity chef, like Mario Batali says, I'll invest, I'll put my name to it, but I want a ton of control in the restaurant in order to do that. Because then, I mean, this guy, Cicero, has no name recognition. He's almost like a quasi gangster, is how they make him out to be in the first season. But are there circumstances where like you have I know celebrities open restaurants like Tom Brady, Jude Law, right? Like if you're putting I think in the city recently, the guy who played Christopher Moltisanti on The Sopranos opened a restaurant. If that's the person, does that change the paradigm a little bit? If you have like name recognition immediately attached to the restaurant?
I think, these are sort of two separate issues, right? Because the kind of people who can pull the plug on a restaurant are the kind of people who are financing the restaurant, and almost never are the famous people financing the restaurant. Very often, someone like Tom Brady will get paid a lot of money to stick his name on the restaurant, and that's a licensing deal. So someone is running this restaurant, someone else has paid for the build out, and either paid for the location or paid for the lease. And those people are paying Tom Brady to use his name. And, there might be some triggers for sort of the termination of the licensing agreement, but Tom would never have the ability to close the restaurant. What Tom would have the ability to do at the very most is revoke the license to use his name. So it's not that the restaurant couldn't cease to exist. It's they would have to, instead of calling it Tom Brady's Grill, they'd have to call it, South Park Grill, or whatever other name that they're going to stick in lieu of Tom Brady if they lose the license.
Lee Bergstein's Grill. My licensing fee is very, very cheap. So I'm putting it out there right now for those who are interested.
Yeah, but I can't imagine a scenario in which the celebrity has the control to do something like that, because usually the celebrity is minimally involved. And even if the celebrity is not Tom Brady, even if the celebrity is a chef, is Emerald, the celebrity will have the obligation to do the menu, and then maybe be on premises for like a certain amount of time after they open, and then maybe they'll have the obligation to pop in once every quarter, to maintain. But they're not going to really have a lot of control. At the very most, they'll say, listen, if you're not executing the food at the level at which I think is acceptable, and if it's going to harm my brand, if you're serving bad food, maybe I can terminate. Or maybe then you have to hire more people to have the labor that it requires to make the food better, to put the work in to make the menu better. So there are things you would do, but you would never be able to just close the restaurant, so to speak.
Yeah. So there's two in season 4. There's kind of two ticking clocks. We talked about there's an actual clock that I was actually a little unclear as to whether the money had to be paid back or whether the money was going to dry up. I think it seems like there was money that was still being infused on almost like a monthly basis, and the spigot was going to close because later on in the season they talk about like the clock's going to stop, but they're going to keep going, and how long can they self-sustain for? So it was actually a little confusing, I thought, what the clock signified. And then secondarily, which you talk about in your article, there's this agreement that's sitting in the inbox of the
Sydney, yeah,
Sydney, the co-chef,
yeah.
who founds the restaurant with Carmy, and we're kind of waiting to see all season if she signs the agreement or not, and it's finalized in the end. You got a lot of problems with the agreement. I had problems with the agreement too, both the structure of the agreement and the advice that she was getting. Can you kind of talk us through maybe the first point first, like what was wrong with the operating agreement itself?
Yeah, well, and I also wanna say that I agree with you that the thing about the clock was a little fuzzy. I think in last season, they had computers say, "You've only got, like, enough money to feed into this for another 2 or 3 months." And what happens is a lot of times when you open a restaurant, you're putting a certain amount of money in, like, an operating reserve account. So when you open a restaurant, you should have a few months worth of basically operating capital. So
Right. Like any business.
yeah, all the money you
Yeah.
need to pay your rent and pay for your cost of good and pay for your labor. And so at one point I thought that he didn't have any money to sort of continue to put into this, and your reserve is your reserve, and when it's spent, it's out. But then he did have the conversation with the sister later, where she said, we're sort of coming up on even, and he's like, okay, but that's that's not making money, and so it did get a little fuzzy on that, and I agree with you, and I'm not exactly sure how they're.
It almost felt like when they started writing, they're like, okay, we want this clock to end, and then they realized, oh, we need to have another season. So let's change the meaning of the clock a little bit
Let's soften
to
it up a little, yeah. But yeah, the operating agreement, when I usually in a good arrangement with a non-dysfunctional arrangement, when people are getting together, and I would say this for anybody starting any business of any kind, is you're sitting down together collectively and you're having these sort of mediation sessions about what you want the partnership to be and look like, and who's going to do what, and what obligations or responsibilities you have to each other, so that everything is transparent and you're all on the same page, and everybody knows who has what control. The investors have maybe certain voting rights, but maybe don't have the control to do, X, Y, or Z. But you would normally sit down and talk about these things, or the operating party, the party who is running the restaurant and doing all of the work. Those are the parties that are drafting that agreement. It would be very rare for the investor to come up and say, here's your document, you're going to sign this thing, which is how it happened in the show. Computer or whatever drafted this document, is or it seemed like computer drafted it. Who's to say if computer is even an attorney? Because he seems like he's a CFO or an accountant or some sort of person. It definitely seemed like it was put together by, at any rate, the investors' side, and that Carmy and his sister seem to have just been like, okay, well, he's family, so we're fine with it. And then when Sydney's like, okay, but he's not my family, they're like, oh, but you have this attorney to review this for you, in the form of Sugar's husband,
right.
who is like also a part of the family. So they're just.
Who I wouldn't trust even if he wasn't Sugar's husband, based on how he's presented on the show. But that's a separate
Yeah,
issue.
and it's not, it's like we don't even really know I don't recall if we've ever been told specifically what kind of law he even practices. Like, he very well could have been like a trust and estates person,
Yeah.
for all I know. It's
Well,
not.
on TV, a lawyer does that. Any lawyer can do any legal job, right? So,
Which is, yeah, again, another like completely unrealistic. I'm not trying to do a lot of work, and even, I know that I raised some IP issues. I fully am also not an IP attorney, so like I can't even really fully opine on this, and would toss that to an expert.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I mean, the process of drafting the document seemed not correct, or at least not healthy. The person from whom it came is not traditionally the person from whom the document would come in the real world if you were doing a restaurant. And then, yeah, Sydney, really needed outside counsel. She needed someone that she was paying to represent her, and not this person who was casually like skimming the document for her, and then like over, microwaved soup, being like, yeah, I looked at it. It's okay. You can sign it. It's fine. And that's how that conversation went. I was like, that's just not how legal representation works. And even if he wasn't let's say he wasn't conflicted. Let's say Carmy, Sydney, and Sugar all had the same exact terms. It's possible that the Sugar's husband could have sort of reviewed and negotiated that for all three, because they all have the same goals. If they have the same goals, and if they have the same rights. And, so there's a lot of pieces that are missing. we don't know whether Carmi had more say than Sydney or more voting than Sydney, or it's not clear how the three of them were treated amongst each other. But that, knowing that would either give me peace of mind or make me more skeptical about Sugar's husband um, advising on this for Sydney or for any single one of them over the other, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And then, I mean, there are just members added to the agreement, like when they're having their knockdown, drag out argument in the last episode of the last scene, like all of a sudden there are new members who are added who have not signed on to the agreement and may not really even understand what it means to take on the. Right away, you think about, oh, I'm the owner of a restaurant. But like you point out in your article, when it's a restaurant that like really isn't making that much money and it's pretty new and it's a carryover from another restaurant that had all kinds of liabilities, including like cash
Possibly. Yeah.
stored away in soup cans or tomato sauce cans. Like, what are the risks of taking on something that you don't know that much about?
Yeah, I mean the especially when a business is operating sort of continuously between the old version of the restaurant and the new version of the restaurant, a lot of liabilities carry over. So any sort of debt that the restaurant had, any like unpaid taxes, the sales taxes will carry over. Any liabilities related to labor. So if they were, a big thing in restaurants is obviously, wage and hour litigation, which is traditionally the employer either purposefully or by accident not providing all the disclosures or not doing the math right or not having an accurate time clock or anything that would, or not even properly allocating the time that is sort of serving versus time that is like prepping and cleaning for states that have tip credits and things like that. So this becomes very complicated very fast.
Yeah.
All of which is to say it's possible.
Let's get really into the weeds and make it as complicated as possible on
All of which
the
is to say
podcast.
it's, when you see someone with a wage and hour suit, I would say, this is me just throwing numbers around, but I would say 90% of the time these people thought they were doing it the right way and were trying to do it the right way and maybe got something very small wrong. That's still the basis for a lawsuit, right? So anything that the former employer was doing wrong, if they were ever paying people in cash, if they were ever, if people weren't doing time cards, if they weren't getting paid all their overtime they were supposed to be getting paid, and all of those employees continue on into the next venture, you inherit any of those claims that existed in the old business. So there were, and all of these things probably happened, and probably they weren't following all of the wage and hour laws because it was a very scrappy little sandwich shop. I would not have been surprised if they were paying everybody in cash, which is like the most illegal thing ever.
There's no way they were doing anything right based on
No,
what we
none.
see about the beef before it transitions to the bear.
None. And so all of those carry over into this new business because you've kept the identity and you've kept the staff and you haven't done anything that would convince a court that you shouldn't be responsible for these things. So it's a huge deal. And which is why a lot of times when people are sort of selling a restaurant, you really never sell the entity itself. You almost always just do an asset sale and you're buying the equipment and tables and chairs. You're maybe buying the website. You're maybe buying the name if you're keeping the name the same. But it would be advised to turn over all the staff, to form a new entity, and all of these other things. And even then, you still need to do like lien searches to make sure that there are no like UCC liens on any of the equipment or whatever. Because if you can buy this equipment, but if the equipment is leased, then you might owe somebody a bunch of money for this equipment. So, there are a lot of ways for liabilities to carry over, but the way they did it is the riskiest, worst way for them to have basically started a new business. Just entirely the worst way they could have done it.
So if Christopher Storer, who's the creator of the Bears, listening or watching this, we will draft the wage and lawsuit storyline for season 5, which would you have a court case at the core of the season. Definitely would be off brand for the show.
Yeah.
You briefly before we let you go, you mentioned the IP issues, and I think what you're referring to is both names, the beef and the bear, I'm sure are not probably the most easily trademarked names, but the one that matters is the beef, because at the end of that season, and I'm guessing this is going to go into season 5. I forgot the name of the chef at the beef. who
Ibrahim, I think.
yes, Ibrahim,
Yeah.
develops the idea with the help of some guy who just literally comes off the street to franchise the beef and expand it. But that implicates various issues, including IP issues, correct?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The beef and the bear are not
Yeah.
strong trademarkable names, and the beef in particular because it's descriptive.
Right.
So you can't trademark something that is descriptive of what you're selling. So that's a very, very weak mark. The bear, I had a problem with first, also because it's not unique. It's not that unique. Um, the thing is, that's Carmi's like name. It's like his nickname. They're Bears Autos. They call him the Bear, and so that's very personal to him. And now he's stepping away from a business, or presumably, if he the events of the finale stick, he's stepping away from a business
I'm sure. I'm
um,
sure. I'm sure it won't stick.
that carries his name. So that you lose the right to his name. It would, and that is important, more important for some people than others. But this has happened in real life many times. I could point you to various times in hospitality history in which an enterprising chef had gotten into the wrong partnership, and then lost the right to their name. So that's also quite dangerous as well. So it's a problem on the marks just not being that good, probably, and then secondarily in that if the Carmi cares about the bear as a mark belonging to him or associated with him, he's losing it. He's walking away from it. And then, on top of it, you've got all of these two separate lines of businesses that have like all their assets are commingled, but we have the potential for one to become extremely successful in the form of like a fast, casual, replicatable, put it in 40 cities brand that now is connected to this weird fine dining restaurant that we don't even know is, what kind of debt it has, what kind of obligations it has. But all the things happening in the restaurant are going to drag down the beef stand because they seem to be just operating as one entity. And in fact, they've suggested repeatedly, oh, if the beef stand makes all this money, we can be floated by it, or the restaurant's going to be saved because we're going to expand the beef, the sandwich shop. But yeah, in real life, you'd have two separate entities, and maybe they have a holding company that is in common, but you'd break those into two separate pieces, and you'd keep their liabilities very separate.
Yeah. No way that's happening here. There's no
No way
parent.
that's happening.
There's no
No,
parent.
yeah, that's
There's
highly
probably not even.
problematic.
There's probably not even a company. If we're being honest, there's probably just. There's probably
Yeah, I
just.
mean, whose name is on the deed to this land? Do you know what I mean? Is it Carmi's name on the deed? Because I guess it was his brother's.
Yeah.
Which again, like, how can Cisco come in and insist they shut this thing down? The operating agreement is a partnership agreement, but the arrangement, the terms they have with Cisco, Uncle Jimmy, were very different. It was like, hey, if this restaurant doesn't work, I get the land, I get to keep this afterwards, and that's also not a very realistic way to capital, to securitize your restaurant. And restaurant investments don't have security attached to them by and large. So that was not a wise decision either. Yeah.
Well, we'll see how much of this they explore in the coming season
Yeah.
and seasons, because it feels like this show could kind of go on forever, given the
Mhm.
runway that it has. Aside from the legal issues, which I think we probably could talk about for another hour and a half or more, do you like the show? Do you find yourself enjoying it when you watch it from like a dramatic perspective, or the legal issues bogging it down way too much where you can't even sit back and enjoy it for what it is?
And no, I do like the show. I really enjoyed season 1 and season 2. I will say the legal issues in season 3 started to like twist a little, and season 4, I was like, ugh, why is this not getting any better? But I'm going to keep watching it because I am curious as to how they wrap it up. I'm curious as to the different tracks the sandwich shop and the restaurant will have.
Yeah.
Curious to find out whether Carmi actually does step away or whether he can't help himself and he's going to stick around and continue to make things messy. So yeah, I do enjoy the show. I think the acting is wonderful, and so yeah, I will continue to watch it.
That last scene, which was like that last episode, which is kind of like a short play, was
Mhm.
amazing acting. Some of the best
Yeah.
acting of the year, I thought.
Yeah, very intense. Right, Jamie Lee Curtis just kills me every single time she's on the show.
She's really good.
She's so insane. She's so good.
The episode, I think in season 3, when Sugar's giving birth with Jamie Lee Curtis there is like one of the best episodes ever.
It's so beautiful. Yeah,
Really
it's so
good.
beautiful. So anyways, I'm a sucker. I'm going to keep watching the show. I'm going to complain about it, but I'm going to keep watching it.
I'm trying to end on an uplifting note. Well, Jasmine, if people want to find out more about what you do, read your stuff, where should they go? What should they do?
Yeah, I'm restaurantlawyer.nyc. And I have a bunch of podcasts and articles and stuff linked there. So that's a good place to find me. One other note I wanted to, because I'm coming off of it, this was yesterday, but the show does mention the pastry chef winning Food and Wine's Best New Chef Award, which is an actual real award. And they actually really awarded them yesterday to everybody in New York. And they did a mentorship day in the morning, which they invited me to so that I could talk to all these aspiring chefs about legal issues that they may face as it relates to sort of their rising star brand and licensing deals and things like that. And then there's a big shindig, a huge party at night. So it's funny because I was very prominently name checked to the Food and Wine Best New Chef, but that is a totally real thing. And it really happens. The unrealistic thing is that they just got the call. They're like, oh, he's going to be named Best New Chef like today. And then the news went out later the day. In reality, they get notified 6 months in advance.
Yeah.
Glossy photos are taken, articles are written so that they can all be published this month in Food and Wine. So if you want to learn more about Best New Chefs in real life, pick up this month's copy of Food and Wine magazine. But yeah, thanks for having me.
Very well. Look, I think we'll have you back. There's a new restaurant show coming up called Black Rabbit with Jason Bateman and actually Jude Law, who I already mentioned. I don't know if Jude Law actually has a restaurant. I was just thinking about Black Rabbit. So I think restaurant TV is starting to pick up. So we'll probably ask you to come back on.
I'm going to add it to my list right now. Yeah, Black Rabbit. Okay.
Thank you so much for being here, Jasmine. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
For more on all things real estate and the law, subscribe to this and our other podcasts. Follow Bergstein, Flynn, Knowlton, and Polina on social media. Subscribe to our newsletter and go to bfklawoffice.com. That's bfklawoffice.com to learn more.